I'm Eleanor, 68 years old, and never thought my son Richard would call me a burden after I sacrificed everything for him. When he dropped me off at Sunshine Pines nursing home with a hasty goodbye, something inside me broke. But as I sat in that sterile room watching him drive away, a plan formed in my mind. If Richard thought I was a burden before, he had no idea what a real burden looked like. And I was about to show him. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family who took you for granted. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned this around. From the moment Richard was born, my life revolved around him. I was 25, bright-eyed and ambitious with a promising career in library sciences. My husband Thomas and I had planned to both keep working, taking turns with childcare. But Richard was colicky, sensitive to most daycares, and needed more attention than we'd anticipated. I'll put my career on hold for a few years, I told Thomas one night after another daycare had called us to pick up our screaming toddler. Just until he's in school. Those few years turned into decades. I never returned to my profession. Instead, I channeled my intelligence and energy into raising Richard, creating educational games, reading to him for hours, and nurturing his curious mind. Thomas worked overtime at his accounting firm to compensate for my lost income. We weren't rich, but we managed. When Richard showed exceptional academic promise in high school, Thomas and I exchanged proud glances over our son's head. "He got your brains," Thomas would say, squeezing my hand. The college acceptance letters started arriving during Richard's senior year. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all offering partial scholarships but none covering the full ride. We sat at our kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to make the numbers work. "Mom, Dad, I really want to go to Harvard," Richard said, his eyes shining with ambition. Thomas and I exchanged glances. "We'll figure it out, son," Thomas promised. That night, Thomas confessed to me that our mortgage was nearly paid off. "We could take out a second mortgage," he suggested, "or use our retirement savings." We chose the latter. Our retirement fund, carefully built over 20 years, was substantially depleted to fund Richard's education. I never regretted it. Seeing him graduate with honors made every sacrifice worthwhile. Richard landed a prestigious job at a finance firm in Boston. He married Stephanie, a beautiful, ambitious woman from a wealthy family. They bought a house in an exclusive neighborhood, had no children, and built successful careers. Thomas and I remained in our modest home, content with our simple life. When Richard visited, he'd look around our aging house with barely concealed discomfort. "You guys should really update this place," he'd say, glancing at our outdated kitchen. We'd smile and change the subject. Our home was filled with memories and we were comfortable there. Then came Thomas's diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The next 18 months were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and mounting medical bills. I spent every waking moment caring for him, administering medications, preparing special meals he could barely eat, and trying to keep his spirits up. Richard visited occasionally, always checking his watch, always needing to get back to work. "Can't you hire a nurse?" he asked once as I was changing Thomas's sheets after a particularly rough night. "We don't have that kind of money," I reminded him gently. "The medical bills have taken almost everything." He nodded absently, then took a business call in the other room. Thomas passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning. He squeezed my hand one last time and whispered, "You were everything to me, Ellie." Just like that, after 43 years of marriage, I was alone. Richard helped arrange the funeral, efficient and practical. Stephanie ordered appropriate flower arrangements. They stayed for 3 days afterward, helping me sort through paperwork and insurance claims. Then they returned to their lives, leaving me to navigate my grief alone. I tried to stay busy. I joined a book club at the local library. I volunteered at an animal shelter once a week. I learned to cook for one. But the silence in the house was deafening. Sometimes I'd talk to Thomas's photograph just to hear a voice, even if it was only my own. The arthritis in my hands worsened over the next few years. Simple tasks like opening jars or buttoning shirts became challenging. My doctor prescribed medication and suggested physical therapy, which helped somewhat. Occasionally I'd forget small things, where I'd put my glasses or whether I'd taken my morning pills. Nothing serious, just the normal forgetfulness of aging. Richard and Stephanie called every Sunday evening like clockwork. Brief conversations about their work, the weather, sometimes politics. I cherished these calls but noticed they grew shorter as months passed. When I mentioned my arthritis flare-ups or doctor's appointments, Richard would quickly change the subject. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing?" he asked during one call. "That house is too much for one person to maintain." "This is my home," I replied simply. "Thomas and I built our life here." The calls became less frequent. Richard was always swamped at work or traveling for business. When they did visit, perhaps twice a year, there was a distance I couldn't bridge. They'd sit stiffly in my living room, declining my home-cooked meals in favor of taking me to restaurants where they discussed their lives while I mostly listened. I never wanted to be a burden. I managed my own affairs, drove myself to appointments, and maintained my home as best I could. If sometimes I called Richard for help with my computer or to understand a legal document, I didn't think I was asking too much. After all, I devoted my life to him. I had no idea that in his mind, I had already become a burden, one he was preparing to discard. It was a crisp Sunday morning in October when Richard and Stephanie arrived unannounced at my door. Richard rarely came without calling first, so immediately I felt something was wrong. "Mom, we need to talk," Richard said as they settled on my couch, declining my offer of coffee and homemade muffins. Stephanie sat ramrod straight, her designer purse clutched on her lap like a shield. Richard cleared his throat several times before speaking. "We've been concerned about you living alone," he began, his voice taking on the same tone he used for business presentations. "Your arthritis is getting worse, and last month you forgot our call completely." "I explained that," I said, feeling defensive. "The power went out during a storm, and my phone wasn't charged." Richard exchanged a glance with Stephanie. "It's not just that. This house has too many stairs. The yard work is too much. And you're all alone if something happens." "I have neighbors," I countered. "Martha next door checks on me every day." "Mom," Richard's voice hardened slightly, "Martha is 73 herself. You both need more support than you can give each other." Stephanie finally spoke up. "What Richard is trying to say, Eleanor, is that we think it's time to consider assisted living." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I stared at them, these two impeccably dressed strangers who somehow looked like my son and his wife. "I'm managing just fine," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice. "I don't need assisted living." "Mom, you're becoming too much to handle," Richard said, the words hitting me like physical blows. "I worry constantly. My work is suffering. Stephanie and I can't keep dropping everything when you have a problem." "When have I ever asked you to drop everything?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I barely ask you for anything." "It's not what you ask for, it's what you need," he replied. "And what you're going to need is only going to increase. We can't take that on. It's becoming a burden we can't manage with our careers." "A burden?" My own son was calling me a burden. "We've found a wonderful place," Stephanie interjected smoothly, pulling a glossy brochure from her purse. "Sunshine Pines. It has everything you need, medical staff available 24/7, social activities, dining facilities." I took the brochure with numb fingers. The cover showed smiling seniors playing cards in a brightly lit room that looked nothing like a home. "This is a nursing home," I whispered. "It's an assisted living facility," Richard corrected. "Top-rated. And it's only 30 minutes from our house, so we can visit often." "I'm not going to a nursing home," I said firmly, handing back the brochure. "This is my home. Thomas and I paid off this mortgage years ago. I'm staying here." Richard's expression hardened. "Mom, we've already made the arrangements. They have a room opening up next week." "It's perfect timing." "Perfect timing for whom?" I asked, my voice rising. "Not for me. I don't want this." "It's not about want, Mom. It's about need. You need more care than we can provide." "Then you're willing to provide," I corrected bitterly. Richard sighed heavily. "This is exactly why we need to do this now while you can still adjust. Your emotional outbursts are getting worse." "Emotional outbursts?" "Because I don't want to be put away like an unwanted pet." Stephanie touched my arm. "Eleanor, many seniors find they love community living once they adjust. You'll make friends, have activities planned for you. I pulled away from her touch. I have friends. I have activities I choose for myself. Mom! Richard's voice took on a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. Be reasonable. This house is too much for you. If you sell it, you'll have extra money for anything you might want. The realization dawned slowly. You want me to sell my home? Richard nodded. I can handle everything. The sale, moving your essential belongings, dealing with the rest. So you get my house, and I get a room in a facility, I summarized flatly. You get proper care, Richard corrected. And security. They stayed for 3 more hours, wearing down my resistance with a combination of practical arguments, emotional manipulation, and what they clearly thought was loving concern. By the time they left, I had somehow agreed to visit Sunshine Pines the following day. That night, I sat in Thomas's old armchair and wept. They want to put me away, Tom, I whispered to his photograph. Our son thinks I'm a burden. The visit to Sunshine Pines was a carefully orchestrated performance. The director, Mrs. Patterson, showed us spacious common areas where no residents seemed to be gathering. The dining room with its institutional tables covered in cheerful cloths. The activity center, where an enthusiastic staff member was setting up for bingo. And this would be your room, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Patterson said, opening a door to a space half the size of my master bedroom. It contained a single bed, a dresser, a small desk, and a bathroom designed for disability access. You can bring personal items to make it homey, she added brightly. Many residents bring favorite pictures, a special chair, small mementos. My house is full of 50 years of mementos, I replied. Richard squeezed my shoulder. We'll pick the most important ones, Mom. The packing was a nightmare. Richard hired efficient young people who sorted through my possessions with detached practicality. This box for Sunshine Pines. That box for storage. Another for donation. Another for the trash. My recipe books. I protested as one was about to toss my collection into a donation box. You won't need these, Mom, Richard said. Sunshine Pines provides all meals. In the end, I managed to save my photo albums, some clothes, a few books, and Thomas's armchair, which barely fit in the small room I was assigned. Moving day arrived too quickly. I took one last walk through my empty house, touching the walls, remembering Thomas carrying me over the threshold, Richard taking his first steps in the living room, family Christmases around the fireplace. It's time, Mom, Richard called from the doorway. At Sunshine Pines, Richard helped arrange my meager possessions in the sterile room. He set up my television and made sure my phone was plugged in. I'll visit this weekend, he promised, checking his watch. You'll settle in quickly. His goodbye hug was brief. I watched from my window as he walked to his car without looking back. Only then did I allow myself to cry. My roommate, Harriet, found me like that an hour later. She was 80, spry despite needing a walker, with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. First day's the worst, honey, she said, offering me a tissue. Second day's nearly as bad. Third day you start plotting your escape. Her laugh was raspy from decades of smoking. Harriet became my guide to Sunshine Pines. She showed me which nurses were kind and which to avoid. She pointed out the residents who'd welcome a new friend, and those who preferred solitude. She warned me about the food. Tuesday's mystery meat is a mystery for good reason, she confided. Always go for the vegetarian option that day. Richard's promised weekend visit never materialized. A text message arrived instead. Swamped with work. We'll try for next weekend. Next weekend became the weekend after, then a brief Wednesday evening visit where he spent most of the time on his phone, then sporadic appearances that grew increasingly rare. One afternoon, passing the administration office, I overheard Mrs. Patterson on the phone. Yes, Mr. Williams, we're taking good care of your mother. These transitions are always difficult, but many adult children find the burden lifted once their parents are in proper care. There was that word again. Burden. When I returned to my room, Harriet was waiting with a contraband cookie from her niece's visit. Your boy call again with another excuse? She asked. I shook my head. I overheard the director talking to him. She told him they were lifting his burden. Harriet's eyes narrowed. Burden my foot. You raised that boy, didn't you? Put him through college? Loved him his whole life? Yes, I whispered. Then he's got a strange definition of burden, she declared. What's a burden is ingratitude. Selfishness. Treating your mama like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Her words stayed with me that night as I tried to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Harriet's soft snores from across the room. In the darkness, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of Richard's betrayal. Days at Sunshine Pines blended together in a monotonous rhythm. Wake-up call at 7 a.m. Breakfast at 8. Morning medications at 9. Optional activities at 10. Usually crafts designed for people with limited dexterity or cognitive issues. Lunch at noon. Afternoon activities at 2, typically bingo or a movie from the 1950s. Dinner at 5. Evening medications at 7. Lights out suggested at 9 p.m. The indignities were numerous and subtle. Staff who spoke about residents in third person while they were present. Does she need help cutting her meat? They'd ask each other over my head. Bathroom doors that didn't lock because of safety concerns. The infantilizing tone used by some of the younger nurses. Did we take our pills like a good girl? I found myself retreating into silence, speaking only when necessary. What was there to say? My son had discarded me. My home was gone. My independence stripped away. Harriet wouldn't stand for it. You're not dead yet, Eleanor, she declared one morning, plunking herself down beside me in the day room. Stop acting like it. Through Harriet, I met Ruth, a former legal secretary with a mind sharp as a tack despite her 92 years, and Frank, a widower with a dry wit who had been a high school history teacher. We formed our own little group, claiming a corner of the day room each afternoon. My daughter visits twice a year, Ruth told me during one of our conversations. Christmas and my birthday. Same gift both times. A nightgown I never wear. My son stops by when guilt overcomes convenience, Frank added. Usually lasts about 20 minutes before his phone rings with an emergency at work. Richard promised to visit every weekend, I confessed. It's been 3 weeks since I've seen him. They dump us here and try to forget we exist, Harriet said bluntly. Makes it easier on their consciences. During Richard's next brief visit, I casually asked about my house. Oh, it sold quickly, he said, looking uncomfortable. Good market right now. That's nice, I replied mildly. When will the proceeds be transferred to my account? Richard shifted in his seat. Well, most of it went to secure your place here. These facilities aren't cheap, Mom. And the rest? I pressed. I'm managing it for you, he said vaguely. Investments. For your future needs. After he left, I reported this conversation to my friends. He stole your house, Harriet declared indignantly. Not legally, Ruth corrected. If he's your financial power of attorney, he can manage your assets. But he should be transparent about it. Did you sign power of attorney papers? Frank asked. I thought back to the blur of documents Richard had put before me during the move. I signed whatever he asked me to, I admitted, shame washing over me. I trusted him. The next day, Ruth helped me request copies of all my financial and legal documents from the administration office. As I suspected, I had signed over financial power of attorney to Richard in my distress. This doesn't give him the right to steal from you, Ruth assured me after reviewing the papers. He's legally obligated to act in your best interest. A week later, during Richard's monthly phone call, I heard Stephanie in the background discussing vacation plans. The Maldives deposit is due tomorrow, she was saying. Make sure you transfer the funds. I'll handle it after this call, Richard replied, his voice muffled as if he'd covered the phone partially. Is Stephanie talking about a vacation? I asked innocently. Richard's voice turned guarded. Yes, we're planning a trip next month. Just a quick getaway. The Maldives sounds exotic, I commented. That must be expensive. We've been saving, he said curtly. Listen, Mom, I need to go. I'll call next Sunday. After the call, I sat on my bed, a cold realization washing over me. My house. The home Thomas and I had saved for, maintained, filled with love and memories, had funded my son's exotic vacation, while I sat in a nursing home wearing donated clothes and eating institutional food. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced our small room, my mind racing. "You're wearing a path in that cheap carpet," Harriet observed from her bed. "Want to talk about it?" I poured out everything: the house, the vacation, the betrayal. "So what are you going to do about it?" Harriet asked when I finished. "Do? What can I do? He has power of attorney. I'm stuck here." Harriet sat up in bed, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Eleanor Williams, are you really going to let that ungrateful son of yours get away with this?" "I don't have any options," I protested. "Nonsense. You have us." She gestured around the room, encompassing herself and, by extension, Ruth and Frank. "And we've got nothing but time to help you plan." The next day, our little group convened in the corner of the garden where staff rarely ventured. "First, we need to know what resources you actually have," Ruth said practically. "Did your husband leave anything that Richard might not know about?" I thought carefully. Thomas was always cautious about money. He believed in having emergency funds. A memory surfaced suddenly. Thomas and I in our bank 5 years before his diagnosis. He was setting up a separate investment account. "Just a little something extra," he'd said. "Our rainy day fund. Let's not mention it to Richard. He'd just try to get us to invest it in something riskier." I gasped. "There's an investment account. Richard doesn't know about it." I'd forgotten completely. "Can you access it?" Frank asked. "I should be able to. It was in both our names." Ruth's legal knowledge proved invaluable as she helped me contact the investment firm. After verifying my identity and surviving spouse status, they confirmed that yes, there was an account. One that had grown significantly over the years through conservative, but steady investments. Not enough to buy a new house, I told my friends after the call, but enough to rent a nice apartment and live comfortably for years. "Perfect," Harriet declared. "Now we can launch Operation Real Burden." "Operation what?" I asked. "Real burden," she repeated with a mischievous smile. "Your son thinks you were a burden before? Let's show him what a real burden looks like." Over the next week, the 4 of us crafted a plan. Ruth researched the legal implications. Frank, with his teacher's organizational skills, helped map out the steps. Harriet contributed strategic mischief. And I found myself awakening from the fog of depression that had enveloped me since arriving at Sunshine Pines. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope, and yes, a desire for justice. Richard had betrayed my trust, stolen my home, and abandoned me. Perhaps it was time he learned that his actions had consequences. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Frank asked me the night before we launched our plan. "It won't be easy." I thought about Thomas, about the life we'd built, about the son we'd raised with love and sacrifice. I thought about Richard's casual dismissal of me as a burden. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time Richard learned what a real burden actually is." The first step was making contact. I called Richard on a Tuesday morning, knowing he'd be at work. "Mom." His voice held surprise and a touch of irritation at the unexpected call. "Is everything okay?" "Not really, Richard," I replied, keeping my voice deliberately feeble. "Something's come up. Something serious. I need to see you as soon as possible. I'm really swamped this week." "It's a legal matter," I interrupted. "Quite serious. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." The word legal worked its magic. Richard agreed to visit that evening after work. Harriet helped me prepare, lending me her shawl, looks more frail, and coaching me on my delivery. "Remember, you're not angry yet. You're hurt, confused, a little scared. Save the anger for later." Richard arrived at 7:30 p.m., looking harried and impatient. "What's this about, Mom?" The receptionist said it was urgent. I gestured for him to sit in the room's only visitor chair. "I've had some disturbing news, Richard." "About my house?" His expression flickered briefly before settling into concerned neutrality. "What about it?" "I was talking to my friend Ruth. She used to be a legal secretary, and she mentioned something strange. She said that as the sole owner after your father died, I should have received all proceeds from its sale. But you mentioned most of it went to this place." I gestured around the small room. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Mom, these facilities are expensive. So I asked Mrs. Patterson about my payment arrangement, I continued calmly. She was quite helpful actually. Showed me all the paperwork. And do you know what I discovered? Richard's face had paled slightly. Mom, I discovered that my Medicare covers 80% of my stay here. The remainder is paid from my Social Security. The house proceeds never came here at all. The silence stretched between us. Richard finally broke it, his voice defensive. I'm managing your money for you. You signed the power of attorney. Yes, I did, I acknowledged. When I was distraught and trusting my son to act in my best interests. Not to fund vacations to the Maldives. His head snapped up. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you sold my home, the home your father and I worked our entire lives for, and kept the money for yourself. That's elder financial abuse, Richard. It's a crime. That's ridiculous. I'm managing your assets. For whose benefit? I challenged. Because Ruth says a court would be very interested in hearing about exotic vacations purchased immediately after liquidating your elderly mother's primary asset. Richard stood abruptly, pacing the small room. Are you threatening me? Your own son.
I'm stating facts, he replied calmly.
You took advantage of me at a vulnerable time. You placed me in a facility against my wishes. You sold my home and kept the proceeds. These are all facts. His face flushed with anger. I did what was best for everyone. You couldn't live alone anymore. You were becoming a burden. There it was again. That word. A burden, I repeated softly. After I gave up my career to raise you. After your father and I depleted our retirement savings to put you through Harvard. After we supported you through every phase of your life. I became a burden. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. What do you want, Mom? Money. Is that it? How much will it take to end this discussion? I don't want your money, Richard. I want out of this place. To go where? You can't live alone. That's my concern, not yours. He laughed humorlessly. So that's your plan? Threaten me with legal action unless I let you move out and endanger yourself. I leaned forward.
No.
My plan is to offer you a solution that benefits us both. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of solution? Instead of living here, I move in with you and Stephanie. What? He sputtered. That's not possible. We both work. The house isn't set up for an elderly person. Stephanie would never. It would save you money, I pointed out reasonably. No more fees to Sunshine Pines. And it would resolve the legal issues immediately. No court would pursue financial abuse if the supposedly stolen assets were being used to provide direct care by the family. Mom, be reasonable. I am being extremely reasonable, I countered. You have two options. Option 1. I pursue legal action for elder financial abuse. It becomes public. Your firm learns about it. Your reputation suffers. Option 2. You take me into your home as you should have done from the beginning. And we put this unfortunate chapter behind us. Richard stared at me for a long moment. I need to talk to Stephanie. Of course, I agreed pleasantly. Take all the time you need. But I'll be calling my lawyer. Ruth has recommended someone excellent. Next Monday if I haven't heard from you. He left in a state of agitation, exactly as planned. Hook baited and swallowed, Harriet declared when I reported back to our group. Think they'll go for it? They don't have much choice, Ruth observed. The threat of legal action for elder financial abuse is serious. His career could be damaged. And Richard has always cared more about appearances than substance, I added, a touch sadly. 3 days later, Richard and Stephanie arrived together. Stephanie looked like she'd been crying. Richard looked resigned. We've discussed your proposal, he said stiffly. We're willing to give it a trial period. 3 months. If it doesn't work out, it will work out beautifully, I assured him with a smile. When can I move in? The discharge process from Sunshine Pines took a week. I said emotional goodbyes to my friends, promising to stay in touch and update them on the plan. Give him hell, Eleanor, Harriet whispered as she hugged me goodbye. Remember, You're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing it for all of us who got discarded. Richard and Stephanie's house was everything mine hadn't been: modern, immaculate, and cold. My assigned room was their guest bedroom, decorated in impersonal hotel-like neutrals. The attached bathroom had been hastily modified with grab bars by the toilet and in the shower. "We've cleared a shelf in the refrigerator for your things," Stephanie informed me, her voice professionally cordial. "And Richard has programmed our numbers into your phone in case you need anything while we're at work." "How thoughtful," I replied, unpacking my meager belongings. "This room is lovely. So much nicer than Sunshine Pines." Their discomfort was palpable. They'd expected arguments, complaints, demands. My pleasant acceptance left them off balance, exactly as intended. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I took out my phone and sent a group text to Harriet, Ruth, and Frank. "Phase 1 complete. Initiating Phase 2 tomorrow." Ruth replied first. "Remember, nothing illegal or dangerous." Frank added, "Pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint." Harriet's response made me smile. "Make them regret ever using the word burden. Show them what a real burden looks like." I fell asleep that night in Richard and Stephanie's pristine guest room, feeling more empowered than I had in months. Phase 1 was complete. Tomorrow, Operation Real Burden would begin in earnest. I began Phase 2 subtly. The key was to establish patterns gradually, creating a new normal that Richard and Stephanie would find increasingly difficult to bear. The first morning, I was up before them, puttering loudly in the kitchen. "Mom!" Richard appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. "It's 5:30 a.m. Is it?" I feigned surprise. The clocks at Sunshine Pines were always wrong. "I'm making breakfast. I thought you'd appreciate a hot meal before work." The kitchen was a disaster zone. I'd used nearly every pot and pan they owned to create a relatively simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, bacon, and pancakes. "You didn't need to do that," Stephanie said, entering the kitchen in her silk pajamas. Her eyes widened at the mess. "Nonsense. It's the least I can do to thank you both for taking me in." I pushed plates toward them. "Eat while it's hot." They exchanged glances but sat down to eat. I chattered continuously throughout breakfast, asking dozens of questions about their schedules, their colleagues, their routines. Each answer provided valuable intelligence for future disruptions. "Don't worry about the dishes," I assured them as they prepared to leave. "I'll take care of everything." When they returned that evening, the kitchen was spotless, but I'd reorganized all their cabinets and drawers according to my own inscrutable system. "Mom, we can't find anything," Richard complained after opening 4 cabinets looking for glasses. "I've improved the flow," I explained earnestly. "It's much more efficient now." Over the next few days, I established several key patterns. 1. Early morning noise under the guise of helpfulness. 2. Constant questions requiring their attention. 3. Improvements to their home organization. 4. Phone calls during their workday for non-urgent matters. 5. Elaborate cooking projects that utilized every surface. By the end of the first week, I could see the strain beginning to show. Richard's jaw was perpetually tight. Stephanie had developed a nervous tic of checking her watch whenever I entered a room. Week 2, I escalated. I invited Harriet for lunch without informing Richard or Stephanie. They arrived home to find us playing opera at full volume while painting watercolors in their formal dining room. "Eleanor!" Stephanie exclaimed upon seeing the art supplies spread across her cherished mahogany table. "We eat in here." "Don't worry, dear. We put down newspaper," I assured her. "This is my dear friend Harriet from Sunshine Pines." "Harriet, this is my daughter-in-law Stephanie and my son Richard." Harriet gave them a sweet smile. "Eleanor has told me so much about you both. Such a blessing that you've opened your home to her. So many children nowadays just warehouse their parents in nursing homes." Richard's face flushed. Stephanie's smile froze. "Will you be staying for dinner, Harriet?" I asked brightly. "I'd love to," Harriet replied before either of them could interject. That night, after Harriet had finally left, following a 4-hour visit, I overheard Richard and Stephanie in their bedroom. "This isn't working," Stephanie hissed. "She's completely taken over the house." "It's only been 2 weeks," Richard replied, though he sounded exhausted. We promised 3 months. At this rate, we won't survive 3 months. I smiled to myself and went to bed. The following week, Ruth and Frank joined the rotation of visitors. Ruth brought legal paperwork she insisted on explaining to Richard in excruciating detail. Frank brought his collection of Civil War memorabilia to display on the coffee table. I began calling Richard multiple times during his workday. Mom, is this an emergency? He asked exasperatedly after the third call one Tuesday. Well, not an emergency exactly, I hedged. But I can't find the good coffee filters. The cheap ones let grounds through. When not disrupting their work, I was disrupting their home. I rearranged furniture for better feng shui. I replaced their minimalist decor with crafts made at Sunshine Pines. I adjusted the thermostat constantly, claiming circulation problems. Meals became an elaborate ordeal. I insisted we all eat together like a family, then dominated conversation with detailed medical anecdotes or long-winded stories about people they'd never met. And then Harriet's niece, you remember I mentioned her yesterday, the one with the problematic gallbladder, she told the doctor. Richard began coming home later. Stephanie developed sudden work events that kept her out in the evenings. When they were home, they retreated to their bedroom early. One night during the 4th week, Richard hosted an important client dinner. He'd mentioned it several times, emphasizing how crucial this client was to his firm. I understand completely, I assured him. You won't even know I'm here. The dinner began smoothly. From my room, I could hear the murmur of professional conversation, the clink of expensive wine glasses. I waited until they'd moved from appetizers to the main course before making my entrance. Richard, dear, I called, shuffling into the dining room in my bathrobe and slippers. I can't find my evening pills. The pink ones for my circulation. The conversation halted. 6 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. Richard and Stephanie in horror, their 4 guests in surprise. Mom, Richard said through gritted teeth. Can this wait just a few minutes? We're in the middle of dinner. But Dr. Feldman said I must take them precisely at 8 p.m., I insisted, checking the ornate clock on their wall. It's 8:07 already. I'll help you find them, Stephanie said, pushing back her chair, her face tight with controlled anger. Oh, thank you, dear, I said gratefully. Then, turning to the guests. Stephanie is such a wonderful daughter-in-law. Taking in her elderly mother-in-law instead of shipping me off to some nursing home. So many young people nowadays just abandon their parents when they become inconvenient. Richard nearly choked on his wine. After Stephanie helped me find my pills, which had been in their usual place all along, I returned to the dining room. I'm so sorry to interrupt again, I said to the guests. But since I'm up, would anyone like to see pictures of Richard as a baby? He had the cutest little birthmark on his. Mom! Richard stood abruptly. It's getting late and you need your rest. Oh, but I'm wide awake now, I protested. And I so rarely get to meet your friends. I could see Richard calculating the social damage of forcibly removing his elderly mother versus letting me stay, and embarrass him further. Stephanie solved his dilemma. Eleanor, I just remembered, Harriet called earlier. She said it was important that you call her back tonight. Did she? Well, I should do that right away. I smiled benignly at the guests. So lovely to meet you all. Richard was such a sensitive child. Cried at the drop of a hat until he was 12. I retreated, leaving uncomfortable silence in my wake. Later that night, after the guests had gone, I overheard the argument I'd been waiting for. This is impossible, Richard shouted, abandoning his usual controlled tone. She's deliberately sabotaging us. Lower your voice, Stephanie hissed. She'll hear you. I don't care if she hears me. Did you see Stephen's face when she started talking about my birthmark? That account is worth millions to the firm. We need another solution, Stephanie said. She can't stay here. We can't send her back to Sunshine Pines. She'll follow through on her threat. Then find somewhere else. Anywhere else. She's making our lives miserable on purpose, Richard. She's turned into a nightmare. A nightmare. A burden. The words floated through their door, confirming what I already knew. Mission accomplished. The next morning, I maintained my cheerful facade, pretending I'd heard nothing. But inside, I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. Operation Real Burden was working perfectly. So why did victory taste so bitter? The breaking point came exactly as my friends and I had predicted. Just over 5 weeks into my stay with Richard and Stephanie, I had been meticulously increasing the pressure each week, calculating exactly how much disruption they could bear before snapping. That evening, Richard was hosting an important dinner for his boss and several senior partners from his firm. Stephanie had spent days preparing, hiring caterers and a service staff, arranging flowers, and generally transforming their already immaculate home into a showcase. "Mom," Richard said that morning before leaving for work, his tone carefully measured, "tonight is extremely important for my career. The senior partners rarely socialize with people at my level. This is a significant opportunity." "It sounds wonderful, dear," I replied innocently. "What time should I be ready?" His expression tightened. "Actually, Mom, these are business associates. The conversation will be mostly about work matters. I thought you might be more comfortable having dinner in your room. I'll have the caterers prepare a special plate for you." "Nonsense," I said firmly. "I'd love to meet your colleagues. I'll wear my blue dress, the one with the sequins." Richard glanced desperately at Stephanie, who stepped in smoothly. "Eleanor, we've arranged for something special for you. A car service will take you to dinner with Harriet, Ruth, and Frank at that Italian restaurant you mentioned liking. Our treat." It was a reasonable solution, too reasonable for me to object without revealing my true intentions. I reluctantly agreed, but secretly made my own plans. I did go to dinner with my friends, enjoying their company and updating them on Operation Real Burden. The restaurant was lovely, the food excellent. But I made sure we finished early. "I'm going to end this tonight," I told them as we waited for our separate car services. "It's time for the final confrontation." Harriet squeezed my hand. "Giving how, Eleanor." The car dropped me at Richard and Stephanie's house at precisely 8:45 p.m., right in the middle of what would be the main course for their dinner party. I could see elegantly dressed people through the dining room windows, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. I let myself in quietly and went to my room, where I changed into my nightgown and robe. Then I mussed my hair slightly and practiced looking confused. When I was satisfied with my appearance, I shuffled into the dining room. "Richard," called, making my voice quaver. "Richard, dear, I'm feeling a bit confused. I can't seem to remember where I am." The conversation stopped instantly. All eyes turned to me, an elderly woman in a bathrobe, looking disoriented in the doorway of an elegant dinner party. Richard's boss, a distinguished man with silver hair, half rose from his chair in concern. "Mom," Richard said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You're at our house. Remember? You went out to dinner with your friends." "Did I?" I pressed a hand to my forehead. "It's all so foggy. I thought I was still at Sunshine Pines." I turned to the dinner guests. "That's the nursing home my son put me in because I was too much trouble to care for himself." Richard stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "Please excuse us," he said to his guests, his professional mask slipping. He took my arm, firmly not gently, and steered me from the room. Once we were in the hallway, his facade shattered completely. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, face contorted with rage. "You went to dinner with your friends. You were perfectly fine. You're deliberately trying to embarrass me." I dropped the confused act, standing straighter and meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, I am," I said calmly. "I'm deliberately trying to make your life difficult. I'm being a burden. A real burden. Not the kind you accused me of being when you dumped me at that nursing home. But the kind I could have been and chose not to be." He stared at me, momentarily speechless. "What?" "You heard me," I continued, my voice low but intense. "For 5 weeks, I've been showing you what it's like to deal with someone who actually wants to be a problem, who actually tries to disrupt your life, who actually doesn't care about your needs or feelings." Richard's anger shifted to confusion. "You've been doing this on purpose? All of it? The early mornings, the constant interruptions, the rearranging. Every single bit of it," I confirmed. "And do you know why?" Stephanie appeared in the hallway, concern and irritation warring on her face. "Richard, your boss is asking." She stopped short, taking in the scene. "What's happening?" "My mother has just informed me that she's been deliberately sabotaging our lives for the past 5 weeks," Richard said, his voice hollow. Stephanie's eyes widened. "What? Why would you do that, Eleanor?" I looked between them, these two successful, selfish people who had discarded me when I became inconvenient. "Because you called me a burden," I said simply. "Because after I gave up my career to raise Richard, after Thomas and I depleted our retirement savings to put him through Harvard, after I spent 50 years putting my family first, my son decided I was too much trouble to deal with. He sold my home out from under me, pocketed the money, and dumped me in a nursing home." "That's not fair," Richard protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Tell me, how much did that vacation to the Maldives cost? The one you booked right after selling my house." Stephanie had the grace to look ashamed. Richard just looked trapped. "You had no right to put me through this hell for the past month," he finally said. "And you had no right to put me in that nursing home," I countered. "To take my home, my independence, my dignity. To decide I was disposable after everything I've done for you. I was trying to do what was best for everyone." "No, Richard. You were doing what was easiest for you." A throat cleared behind us. Richard's boss stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "I believe we should call it a night," he said quietly. "Thank you for dinner, Richard." Stephanie. The other guests filed out behind him, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Richard watched his carefully orchestrated career opportunity dissolve before his eyes. When the last guest had gone, he turned to me, fury reigniting. "Are you happy now? You've ruined everything." "No, Richard. You ruined everything 5 weeks ago when you decided your mother was a burden to be discarded rather than a person to be loved." The three of us stood in silence for a long moment. Surprisingly, it was Stephanie who spoke first. "She's right, Richard." He turned to her in disbelief. "What?" Stephanie's perfect composure had cracked. "I went along with the nursing home because you convinced me it was the best option for Eleanor's care. But I've been uncomfortable with it from the beginning. And the house money." She shook her head. "It wasn't right." "You never said anything," Richard accused. "Would you have listened?" she asked quietly. Another silence fell, heavier than before. "What do you want, Mom?" Richard finally asked, sounding defeated. "To keep torturing us indefinitely? Is that your revenge?" "I don't want revenge," I said honestly. "I wanted you to understand how it felt, to be treated as a problem rather than a person. To be discarded by someone who's supposed to love you. To have your feelings and wishes ignored." I took a deep breath. "But mostly, I wanted you to recognize what you'd done. Not just to me but to yourself. What kind of person discards their mother when she becomes inconvenient?" Richard looked away, unable to meet my eyes. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy I'd raised. The sensitive child who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant, who'd given his lunch money to a classmate who couldn't afford to eat. Somewhere along the way, that boy had been buried under layers of ambition and selfishness. "I don't actually need to live with you," I said more gently. "I never did." "What?" Richard's head snapped up. "Thomas left an investment account you didn't know about. It's enough for me to live comfortably on my own. I could have moved into a nice senior apartment at any time." "Then why?" "Because you needed to learn that actions have consequences. That people have value beyond their convenience to you. That your mother deserves better than to be treated like a burden after everything she's sacrificed for you." Stephanie wiped away a tear. "She's right, Richard." He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know what to say." "You could start with 'I'm sorry,'" I suggested. Richard looked up at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years.
"I'm sorry, Mom.
I was wrong. About everything. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to erase the pain of betrayal. But it was a start. I'm moving out tomorrow," I told them. "I've already arranged for an apartment in a senior living community. Not a nursing home," I clarified. "A proper apartment where I can live independently, while having assistance available if needed." "I'll help you move," Richard offered quietly. I nodded. accepting this small gesture of atonement. Thank you. That night, in the guest room that had never felt like mine, I texted my friends. Mission accomplished. Moving tomorrow. Phase 3 begins. Harriet replied first. Congratulations, warrior. We knew you could do it. Ruth added. So proud of you. Let us know when you're settled. Frank's message was simple. Well done, Eleanor. Thomas would be proud. I fell asleep thinking of Thomas, wondering if he had somehow guided me through this journey. Not with supernatural intervention, but through the strength he'd always believed I possessed. My new apartment at Willow Creek Senior Living was everything Sunshine Pines wasn't. Spacious, bright, and most importantly mine. With a bedroom, living room, full kitchen, and small balcony overlooking a garden, it felt like a home rather than an institution. True to his word, Richard helped with the move. He rented a truck, hired movers, and spent the day arranging furniture according to my instructions. He worked silently, his usual confidence replaced by a chastened humility. The couch looks better under the window, I suggested at one point. He moved it without argument, a stark contrast to the controlling son who had orchestrated my move to Sunshine Pines. Stephanie arrived in the afternoon with housewarming gifts, quality linens, kitchen supplies, and a beautiful plant for my balcony. I hope these help make it feel like home, she said, her usual polished veneer softened by genuine concern. Thank you, I replied, accepting both the gifts and the tentative olive branch they represented. After the movers left, the three of us sat awkwardly in my new living room. It's a nice place, Richard offered. Seems well run. It is, I confirmed. And importantly, it was my choice. He nodded, acknowledging the rebuke. Mom, about what happened? I held up a hand. Not today, Richard. Today is about new beginnings, not rehashing old wounds. The relief on his face was palpable. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Perhaps he never would be. But the seed had been planted, and that would have to be enough for now. Within weeks, I had established a comfortable routine. Mornings began with coffee on my balcony, watching birds in the garden below. I joined a book club that met in the community room on Tuesdays. On Thursdays, I volunteered at the local library, helping with children's reading hour, putting my old library sciences knowledge to good use at last. Best of all, I had my freedom. I could cook what I wanted, sleep when I wanted, structure my days according to my preferences rather than institutional schedules. Harriet, Ruth, and Frank visited often. We'd laugh about Operation Real Burden, analyzing its execution like generals reviewing a successful military campaign. The early morning kitchen disasters were inspired, Frank would chuckle. Psychological warfare at its finest. Richard began visiting weekly, always calling first to arrange a convenient time, a small but significant acknowledgement of my autonomy. Our conversations remained somewhat stilted, the breach between us too deep to be quickly repaired. But there were moments of genuine connection, brief glimpses of the relationship we might rebuild. One Sunday about a month after my move, he arrived with photo albums I hadn't seen in years. I found these in storage, he explained. Thought you might want them. We spent the afternoon looking through photographs of his childhood, camping trips, birthday parties, school plays. For once, Richard didn't check his watch or take business calls. I forgot about this trip, he said, pointing to a photo of himself at 10, proudly holding a fish nearly as big as he was. Dad was so patient, teaching me to cast that line over and over. You were determined to catch the biggest fish in the lake, I recalled, smiling at the memory. You always did set ambitious goals. Too ambitious sometimes, he admitted quietly. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging how his single-minded career focus had damaged our relationship. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly through Stephanie. She began visiting on her own, initially with transparent excuses about being in the neighborhood. Later with honest admissions that she enjoyed our conversations. Richard's working through a lot, she confided during one visit. He started seeing a therapist, though he'd die if he knew I told you. Has he? I was genuinely surprised. Stephanie nodded. What happened with you? It forced him to look at himself in a way he never has before. He doesn't like what he sees. Self-awareness can be painful, I acknowledged. He talks about his childhood differently now, she continued. Before, it was always about the prestigious schools and opportunities that set him up for success. Now he talks about the sacrifices you and Thomas made, the stability you provided. This was healing in its own way. Not the dramatic apology scene I'd once imagined, but a quiet fundamental shift in perspective. 3 months after my move, Richard and Stephanie invited me to dinner at their home. A far different experience from my previous stay. Richard grilled on the patio. His usual intensity softened. Stephanie and I prepared a salad together, our conversation flowing more naturally than ever before. After dinner, Richard cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, there's something I need to say." He reached for a folder on the sideboard and placed it before me. Inside was a check, a substantial one. "This is the proceeds from your house sale plus interest," he explained. "It should have been yours all along. I was wrong to keep it." I looked at the check, then at my son. "Thank you, Richard. This was the right thing to do. I know it doesn't fix everything," he added. "Maybe nothing can. But I want you to know that I understand now what I did was wrong. Not just legally but morally. You deserved better from me. It wasn't a complete healing of our relationship. That would take years if it happened at all. But it was a genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a concrete step toward making amends. With the house proceeds restored, I had more financial freedom than I'd expected in my later years. I established a regular lunch with my friends from Sunshine Pines, sometimes hosting them in my apartment, other times taking them out to restaurants far nicer than they could normally afford. "You're our guardian angel," Harriet declared one day after I'd treated them to a gourmet meal. "No," I corrected her. "I'm your friend. And you three helped me when I needed it most." 6 months after Operation Real Burden, Richard invited me to a family dinner that included his boss, the same man who had witnessed our confrontation that fateful night. "Eleanor," he greeted me warmly. "Richard has told me quite a bit about you since we last met." "All good things, I hope," I replied, curious about what my son might have shared. "Actually, he told me about your background in library sciences, how you gave up your career to raise him." The man smiled. "Our firm has been funding a literacy program for underprivileged children. We could use someone with your expertise on the advisory board." I glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "It was my suggestion, Mom. Your knowledge is valuable. It always has been, even when I failed to recognize it." That night, as Richard drove me home, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. "You know," I said, "when I planned Operation Real Burden, I was focused entirely on making you understand what you'd done wrong. I never expected it to lead to healing." Richard was quiet for a moment. "I deserved everything you did. It opened my eyes to who I was becoming. Someone who could discard his own mother when she became inconvenient." He shook his head. "That's not who I want to be." "It's not who you were raised to be," I agreed. "No, it's not." He pulled up in front of my building. "I have a long way to go to make things right, Mom. But I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do," I told him. "Try to be better today than we were yesterday." As I settled into my apartment that night, I thought about the lessons of the past year. How easily familial bonds can fray when tested by inconvenience. How quick we are to discard people when they no longer serve our purposes. How society treats its elderly as burdens rather than repositories of wisdom and experience. But I also thought about resilience, about the power of standing up for oneself, about the family we choose when the family we're born into fails us. I thought about Harriet, Ruth, and Frank, who had become as dear to me as any blood relatives. And I thought about the possibility of redemption, how Richard was slowly finding his way back to the values Thomas and I had tried to instill. My phone chimed with a text from Richard. "Thanks for coming tonight. Working on being better. Love you, Mom." Such a simple message, yet so meaningful after everything we'd been through. I once believed that being called a burden was the greatest injury my son could inflict. I now understand that the real injury was being treated as disposable after a lifetime of love and sacrifice. The word was merely a symptom of a deeper ailment, a culture that values productivity over humanity, convenience over connection. If my story teaches anything, let it be this. We are none of us burdens, no matter our age or abilities. We are human beings deserving of dignity, respect, and love. Sometimes we must fight for that recognition. Sometimes we must show others exactly what a real burden looks like before they appreciate the gift of our easy grace. And sometimes in that fight we find not just justice but healing, for ourselves and for those who wronged us. Where are you watching from today? If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and redemption. Have you ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted? Share your experience in the comments below. Remember, your story matters too, and there's strength in our shared experiences. Thank you for listening, and may you always know your true worth, regardless of what others might say or do. Until next time, this is Eleanor, wishing you the courage to stand up for yourself with dignity and grace.